Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I will be going through my latest CD purchases from charity shops. There's quite a few to go through, so we're going to crack on. And first up we've got Buzzcocks and Trade Test Transmissions. This came out in the mid-90s after the band had reformed. The quality of the songs isn't as good as in their earlier releases from the late 70s. They were still a brilliant live band, but the CD doesn't quite cut it when compared to their classic era, but still nice to have. Next up we have Calexico, Edge of the Sun. This is a duo that was formed by Joey Burns and John Convertino. They used to be in the band Giant Sand. On this album they're joined by a number of guest vocalists from indie rock bands from America. So for example you've got Sam Beam who records as Iron and Wine, Ben Bridwell from Bound of Horses, Nico Case is on this as well. It all gets a bit too indie rock for American indie rock for me, but then the second CD they're joined by some Mexican musicians, and it has a great feel to it and gets back to the sort of Americana sound which I prefer from the band. I also got a sealed copy of Leonard Cohen's Greatest Hits. The version that I had just reissued the album that came out in the 70s, but this one adds on a few more of the classic tracks that he recorded post 1980. So Dance Me to the End of Love, First We Take Manhattan, I'm Your Man, Hallelujah, they're all on here. It's one of the best greatest hits albums of all time. Next up it's the Duckworth-Lewis method, and this is a duo formed by Neil Hannon, who's the Divine Comedy, and Thomas Walsh, who's in the band Pugwash, an Irish band. And Thomas Walsh is very influenced by Jeff Lynne and ELO. They're both individually brilliant artists, and this was an interesting idea. All the songs are cricket themed, so it doesn't mean a lot to non-cricket fans or Americans, but the sound that they create is really good pop music. Next we've got the Everly Brothers, and this was when they reformed in the 1980s, and it's produced by Dave Edmunds, and there's a number of famous people providing songs for the band. So for example you've got Paul McCartney who provides On the Wings of a Nightingale, and there's a couple of Don Everly songs, 3 Don Everly songs on this as well. Next, Brian Ferry, These Foolish Things. It's an album that works well in places. I really love his version of A Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall. When I first heard it in the 1970s, I knew nothing about Bob Dylan, and I thought this was a brilliant original song written by Brian Ferry. And he also does a very good version of These Foolish Things, and some of it's not too good. His version of Sympathy for the Devil is a bit pointless really, and The Tracks of My Tears doesn't really do it for me, but it's nice enough. This is brand new sealed, the original 5 Blind Boys of Alabama, The Sermon, and it's released on Ace. And on the liner notes here it says that these are recordings from the 1950s led by the charismatic Clarence Fountain, and it says that it's 27 tracks, all but 2 are previously unissued, and it finds them mixing jazz, Latin rhythms and even comedy into their repertoire. Obviously I've not heard it yet, as I've left it sealed for now. An excellent modern psych record by Foxy Gen with a very long title, which is We Are the 21st Century Ambassadors of Peace and Magic. And the duo of Sam France and Jonathan Rado are joined by Richard Swift, one of my favourite artists, and Richard Swift produces this album as well. A best of by NANCI GRIFFITH, which has 22 tracks, including From a Distance, Forward Econoline, and which others do I recognise? Lone Star State of Mind, she does a version of. There's been better compilations of Emmylou Harris's material, but this was the first one that came out, Profile, which covers her first few albums from the 1970s. And whoops, half of my CDs have just fallen on the floor, but we'll carry on anyway. And next we've got another best of, the best of John Lee Hooker, and another blues compilation by Etta James, I Just Want to Make Love to You. And it says on the front it's 23 early 1960s classics, including At Last and I Just Want to Make Love to You, from the First Lady of Chess Records. This is a double CD by ELTON JOHN Rare Masters, which came out in the 1990s, and it's an interesting mix. It includes the original soundtrack Friends, which seems a bit pointless. They could have concentrated on more rare tracks than that, but some of the very early singles like Lady Samantha are well worth listening to, and there's also some alternate takes, including a very good outtake of Madman Across the Water, where he's joined by Mick Ronson on guitar, and some of the later tracks, Skyline Pigeon's very good. There is some superfluous stuff, so for example you've got Step Into Christmas and its B-side, which I wouldn't have bothered putting on, but it's not bad at all. Right, carry on and try not to drop any more CDs. I'm not sure I can say anything about this that you don't already know. Led Zeppelin 3. I got this because it was so cheap. I think I've already got a copy somewhere. This one I took a punt on based on the label that it's on. It's on Domino Records, but having checked, Jason Lowenstein, he was a member of Sebado along with Lou Barlow, and he's been in another band, I think the Fiery Furnaces, I may be wrong, but he's done a couple of solo albums. This was the first that he did in about 2002. It's a bit samey, but it's some good guitar playing on there, and he plays all the instruments himself. And this came out, George McRae, The Singles, 1974-1976. This came out on a Cherry Red label that tends to specialise in sort of glam pop music, the 7Ts label it's called. But George McRae is well remembered in this country for his #1 single, Rock Your Baby. This is a more obscure one, My, live at Drury Lane Library. My is the recording name for Jamie Lockhart. He's mainly a record producer. He has his own studio based in Leeds. This was recorded live a few years ago at a music festival that took place in Wakefield near Leeds. These tracks have been re-released a number of times over the years. This is the first solo recordings that Van Morrison made for Bang Records. So the one that everyone knows is Brown Eyed Girl. And this has got 5 extra tracks. It's since been reissued with all the tracks that were recorded at the sessions. But it's got a nice booklet with it, so it's worth having. This was just 50p in a nice digipack. Willie Nelson, Songbird. I had high hopes for this CD as it's produced by Ryan Adams and his backing band, the Cardinals, play on it, and the opening track is magnificent and highly recommend Rainy Day Blues. Some of the other tracks though are far too obvious as song choices. Do we really need to hear Willie Nelson's version of Songbird? What else? Amazing Grace, Hallelujah. So it's a bit of a hit and miss recording. It could have been so much better. This is Public Image Limited and the Flowers of Romance. This is another slightly flawed record. I always thought the drums were too high in the mix, and Keith Levin, who was a fantastic guitar player, you hardly hear his guitars on this album at all. But the track that does work best for me is Go Back, and that's well worth hearing. A nice compilation of the REM singles that were recorded for the IRS label before they signed to a major, and it makes you realise what a great singles band they were, although their B-sides are absolutely appalling. There's one in particular on here, King of the Road, which is just diabolical, but it's worth it for the A-side. So you've got 10 A-sides on this CD. I seem to be discovering quite a few country singer-songwriters, and this is the first CD I've ever owned by Tom Russell, recording as the Tom Russell Band, and it's called Poor Man's Dream. Having checked him out online, I've heard that the track on here, Gallo del Cielo, is his most famous song, and I think he was working as a taxi driver, and he'd practically given up on a music career, and he had I think it was Robert Hunter, the lyricist for the Grateful Dead, in the back seat of his car, and he played him that song, Gallo del Cielo. Robert Hunter was well impressed and put him on as his support act at his next concert, and it reignited his interest in music, and he's certainly been prolific over the years. He tours regularly in the UK and he seems to release an album every year. This is a perfect compilation of the undertones, basically the first few tracks on here: Teenage Kicks, My Perfect Cousin, Jimmy Jimmy, Here Comes the Summer. This is just fantastic pop punk. It's never been bettered. And there's a second disc, a bonus DVD, where you get the video for Teenage Kicks. Carrying on, we've got T-Bone Walker, T-Bone Blues. This is a very nice album. Can't remember which tracks I particularly liked. I think T-Bone Shuffle, and it's and Papa Ain't Salty I liked as well. One of the great bands that got their start from the punk explosion in the late 70s here in the UK, but were never ever a punk band. They were always in the tradition of classic 60s guitar pop bands, and this is one of their best. There's some fantastic tracks on this. I particularly like the second track, Helicopter. And finally, here's a CD on the Jaguar label by Richard Youngs, who I've talked about on another video, and he is a minimalist composer, and there's folk elements in his music. On this album he plays acoustic guitar, and he double tracks vocals which sound out of sync to begin with, but gradually you become mesmerised by them. And the last track, which lasts over 16 minutes, is is fantastic. Something Like Air. And that's all of the CDs for now, and no doubt I'll be finding some more in the next few weeks, and I'll post another video then.